Witnesses who were there at the time, this was the purpose of having Sirhan. When he fired first those two shots, the whole room was totally distracted and everybody was fixed on him. And that's really what they had in mind. That's really what they had in mind. Yeah. No, government agencies and government agents are foot soldiers for the forces who rule this country. And we better understand that that's how it works. FBI agents, CIA agents really are foot soldiers, and they have their positions and they carry out their tasks, often in a very straightforward, decent, professional way. But when it comes to some matters, like these ones which we are discussing, they follow the masters. Now, how do you know that? Who are the bankers who benefit from the oil and energy crises and the bail-in legislation that comes through? Who are the bankers who do that? You know, I became close friends with Madeline Brown. You know who Madeline Brown is? All right. She was Lyndon Johnson's mistress. She gave Lyndon Johnson his only son, died when he was around 40. And she was in love with Lyndon Johnson. And she would go to various events and affairs with Lyndon. And she was at Clint Murchison's house on the 21st of November, 1963. It was a party there that Murchison hosted for J. Edgar Hoover, Richard Nixon, H.L. Hunt, a number of other oil men, the mayor of Dallas. They were all gathered there in that party. Right. Lyndon came in about 10 o'clock that night. They all went into Clint's study, came out about 20 minutes later. He goes up behind Madeline, puts his arms around her and says, "After tomorrow, the son of a bitch in Kennedy's will never embarrass me again." Next morning, he calls her from Fort Worth. He says, "I'm going to hear the son of a bitch deliver his last speech." All right? Madeline told me, I pushed her to write. She did a book eventually called Texas in the Morning, which she sets this out. And I never could understand why she loved this guy, but nevertheless she did. And so it's very clear. It was very clear that was a very critical meeting. Now, who else was at that meeting? It puzzled me for years. John J. McCloy. How many know who John J. McCloy is? He is one of the key, more senior agents and representatives of the ruling forces. He was, at that time, chairman of Chase Manhattan Bank. And I kept saying, what is Chase Manhattan Bank? Why would David Rockefeller allow his number one man, who had been also Governor General of Germany and he ran the main prison, released all of the Nazis to go to Latin South America. So why would this guy be at this kind of meeting and getting this kind of information? And I couldn't understand it because I happened to be friendly with the Rockefeller family, from my sins in a sense, because Nelson tried to get me to run for office for years, so I came in to become friendly. I never run for office. Become friendly with the family, with his daughter, Nelson's daughter, Annie, and David's daughter, Abby. And Abby and I still to this day are friends. I asked Abby to set up a meeting with her father before my daughter, before he died. And she pleaded, no, he's trying to reconcile with the children, and don't ask me to do that. So I said, forget about it. I didn't. But I mean, if I had confronted him, he would, of course, he would deny any involvement in the assassination, but in my view, he had to sign off. McCloy's presence meant Eastern, powerful, banking interest signed off on the killing of Jack Kennedy. Now, why? He's going to remove the oil depletion allowance from the oil companies. It cost them billions of dollars. He's going to end the war in Vietnam. Cost the oil and energy and military establishment billions of dollars. Jack Kennedy was becoming intolerable. And someone last night pointed out that maybe he said he was going to look at the 1913 Federal Reserve Act and figure, because that was the key to the control of finance in the country.
He published, as you recall, he published a series of bills that were backed by gold again. He published that were directly backed by the government. One series he published, it has a red seal on it, it's very well known. A couple of things.
So let me just finish this. So I think it eventually, me being a bit thick, it eventually became clear that these were major forces that were determined to get rid of John Kennedy.
Jerry, before we get to you, Brian, back, just two quick footnotes. John McCloy was on the Warren Commission, so he's one of the 7 commissioners adjudicating all of this.
And he also published a letter, it's in the Holocaust Museum, where, when the position he had in World War II, he prohibited the bombing of the rail lines going into Auschwitz.
Yes.
And two more very quick things.
Well,
He was also, in the 1950s, head of the Ford Foundation, one of the major foundations in this country, and in a establishment biography of that, page 493, as I recall, it describes, by Kay Bird, it describes the Ford Foundation as the #1 pass-through for CIA money to launder it for worthy purposes. The other very quick thing is Madeline Brown, while she's passed away now, is described for blunt purposes as a mistress. She was also a somewhat prominent person in public relations.
Yes, she was.
And
Yes.
so she was regarded as a professional woman, not,
Yes.
quote, mistress. So what we're talking about is this is a description of cutting through the public veneer of these people and institutions.
I'll just one further caveat to your first question. In the course of my work, I identified the military man who was a colonel and a CIA agent who was responsible for putting the SWAT team, choosing the SWAT team and putting them into Memphis as a backup unit in case a civilian shooter didn't get Dr. King. His name was John Downey, Colonel John Downey. John Downey was Lyndon Johnson's briefer on Vietnam. In fact, at one point, I think he said he thought he knew me in Vietnam. I don't believe that's the case. But in any event, he would come back and brief the president on the war in Vietnam. And he kept saying to the president, what are we doing here? Why are we here, Mr. President? Why are we losing blood and treasure in this kind of horrific war? What is this all about? Why can't we get out of here? Why do we? And Johnson ignored him for the most part. And then finally, one day, the president, I guess, thought he'd had enough, or he was irascible. He pounded the table and he said, John, I can't get out of Vietnam. My friends are making too much money. Now, so that you get glimpses of these forces, like H.L. Hunt at the time, but across the country, and their bankers, who, if they can compromise you, if they can buy you off, if they can give you another job, if they can promote you, if they can do anything else but kill you, they will do that. Or they will blacklist you if you're too much of a nuisance, like Pete Seeger was for a number of years. They blacklist you, you don't have an audience. They'll do all of that. But at the end of the day, if they can't do anything else, and you're too dangerous, that's when the politics of assassination come in. But it's throughout history. I'm working on a book now that goes back to the Sumerians, down to the present time. And it's throughout history, political assassinations have been the ultimate task when someone is intolerable. And you can see it in British history. We see it all the way down. Now, the person who gave me this information about Downey, just so you know it's cited, was his daughter. And I got her finally to talk to me, and she told me this, and she said when he heard this from Johnson that afternoon, he came home. He said to his wife, pack your bags, we're going, I'm having myself assigned to Canada, to the embassy in Canada. He said, I'm not going to have anything more to do with this. And he, in many ways, I have to respect this guy, and I look on him as a patriot on the one hand. On the other hand, he then came back the following June, and he headed up the the unit that was responsible for backing up the killing of King. So you had the balance, and is that where the racism comes in? Possibly, right? Possibly. He was from Pennsylvania, rural Pennsylvania, possibly. Also, he without doubt believed he was doing the right thing, as would David Rockefeller. If rather than being at some cookout with him up in Mechanico, as if I had a serious talk with him and said, about this, he would defend it. If he had to, if he was really nailed, he'd defend it as being the best interest of the perpetuation of democracy in this republic. And he'd do it unashamedly, I'm sure.
Jerry?
In terms of the shooting of Robert Kennedy, were you aware of the Elkins family, which was the primary witnesses in the McClellan hearings, ran the mobs in the West, had warned Bobby Kennedy in Portland, Oregon, just before the California primary, to fire his bodyguards. Did you ever come across that? I had that firsthand.
He said what?
Ray Elkins, one of the family,
Yeah,
flew
but
to Portland
yeah,
and told Bobby to fire his bodyguards.
yeah. It wasn't his bodyguard, it was his advance man, but that's a whole other story, because he had the same advance man that John had,
Bill Berry.
No?
Jerry Bruno.
Oh, Jerry Bruno, right.